sessions. And so Judges chapter number 6, verse 25, again looking at the second part of Gideon. Judges 6 and verse 25, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years, and throw down that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. And build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of the rock in the ordered place. And take the second bullock and offer a burnt offering or burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. And so I want to stop there just for a couple of minutes. These verses really have a lot in them, and the rest of them is going to be kind of review or kind of just giving us a little more information. But in that verse number 25, it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years. So he's talking about two different bullocks. One that's a young one and one that is 7 years old. Now, how long have they been under this oppression? Do you guys remember from last week? 7 years. And so this second bullock was born the same year that the Midianites came and started the oppression. And then he says, Throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath. That word throw down is an interesting word. The Hebrew word is harass. Does that sound like any English word? Literally, the Hebrew word is harass. And so that Hebrew word means to utterly destroy. So the idea of throw down here, we might think of it lightly, but it's an utter destruction. As a matter of fact, it's going to take the two bullocks to utterly destroy these two places, the altar of Baal and the groves. And I'm going to talk about the groves here in just a second. But it's going to take these two bullocks. But then I want you to drop down real quick with me to verse 27. Right? In verse number 27, it says, Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants. So it's going to take Gideon, 2 bullocks, and 10 men to destroy this altar and tear down those groves, to utterly destroy. And that's going to be stamping those things, utter destruction. That means you're not going to be able to recognize that that was an altar to Baal or the groves. Now, when you think of groves, what do you guys think of? That's what I think of is an area with a tight area with trees, and you would go in the midst of the trees and do whatever. That's what I used to think. But the idea of groves, and trees may be involved, but the idea of groves here, at least with this one that is to be cut down, it's actually comprised of a bunch of, and it's described like this, vile images to the god Ashtaroth. And so we have an altar to Baal, and we have images to Ashtaroth. And the command is given to Gideon to go in and to utterly destroy, or to throw down and destroy, cut down that altar and those groves. That seems a little harsh, doesn't it? I mean, how many people in the area were worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth? I mean, the town probably was worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth. And then we got one guy, it seems like just on a whim, goes in and destroys that altar and cuts down those groves. That seems a little harsh, doesn't it? I mean, how long have we been worshiping Baal? And how long have we been worshiping Ashtaroth? But you know, in order for God to do a work, some things need to be stopped. And sometimes things need to be stopped forcefully, abruptly. As I'm studying through Judges, there's a commentary guide that I like to read on this. The commentator's name is John Butler. And he says this about this passage and this verse. He says, this will be too strong for the carnal in our churches. But they're part of the problem, not part of the solution. The carnal in these villages, in this village, you know what the carnal in the village were doing? The carnal Jews in the village were doing? They were worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth. You know what carnal people do in our churches? It's not worshiping God. More likely than not, it's worshiping self. What can the church do for me? While I'm on this subject, let me just throw this out. If you guys are going to start looking for another church, because number one, you're going to fire me. Number two, you're going to fire me. Please, this is like, please fire me. No. But if for whatever reason you move out of the area, you're looking for another church, the last thing that you ought to do is look at the programs of the church and see what the church has for you. That's the last thing you should do. You know what the first thing that you should be thinking when you're looking for another church or you're thinking about your own church is, what can I do for God? How can I serve God in the place that I am? Don't look at a list of programs that the church might have so that you can say, oh, look, they've got a coffee bar and they've got a donut bar and they've got, a ministry for old people, and so they're going to come out to my house and they're going to feed me 3 times a week. And then, they have 17 ministries for children. So we can plug our kids in. Where's praying to God on that? Where's finding God's will for that? Now, I'm not saying churches that have those programs are bad, but that's not the first thing you need to be looking at. The first thing you need to be looking at is, God, is this the place you want me to serve you? Carnal Christians look at programs. Spiritual Christians are praying, how can they fit in and how can they serve? And so the first thing that needs to be, and boy, that's kind of harsh, isn't it? That's kind of harsh. Isn't that what we should be doing as Christians, is looking for how we can serve God? Or are we looking for how God can serve us? There needs to be some cutting out. When we talk about our Christian lives, there's some things in our lives that need to be cut out. And this idea of worshiping other gods, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's like 3 of the top 10, is it not? Hold your place here. Let's look at Exodus chapter 20, where the 10 Commandments are. And you guys could probably quote these, but let's look at it anyways. In Exodus chapter 20, and verse number 1, Exodus chapter 20 and verse number 1, and God spake these words, and God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. What were Baal and Ashtaroth to the Jews? That was another god before God, right? All right, let's look at number 2. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. What was the groves again? What was the groves again? Images for Ashtaroth? Would you say that was a graven image? What were the Jews doing in that area? So number one, they had a God before God. Number two, they had graven images. All right, let's look at the third one. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So if you build an altar and you have groves and you build a groves, what are you doing in there? Just looking at it and say, ooh, look at that. What are you doing? Don't you go there and worship? So you see how the Jews had broken the first 3 of the 10 commandments that were given to Moses. And so do you think God was right in judging Israel for this sin? He absolutely was. So the first action that had to be done was the tearing down. All right, let's go back to Judges chapter 6 and pick it up in verse number 26. Judges chapter 6 and verse 26. So first of all, in 25, there had to be a tearing down. In verse 26, there has to be a building up. And build an altar unto the Lord thy God on top of this rock. Let's stop there for a second. Where were you to build this altar? Yeah, where? Doesn't it say on top of this rock? Can you hide something when it's on top of a rock? No. How is our Christianity supposed to be? Let's bring it to us. Let's bring it to us. How's our Christianity supposed to be? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. You know how the song goes? Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. We don't hide our light. We need to put our light on top of a rock. And so that's where the Lord told Gideon to build the altar of the Lord. So there's got to be a tearing down of the old, a tearing down of the evil, and a building up of God, but it's got to be visible. And then it says, in the ordered place. Doesn't that sound like the opposite of chaos? Have you seen some videos of some church services that go on today that look like utter chaos? I don't even know in some of these videos who the pastor is. So in the ordered place. And then it says, and take the second bullock and offer a burnt sacrifice with wood of the grove, which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. Now, doesn't it sound like Gideon is afraid here? What's he afraid of? Well, we get that anyways. The fear here really is, and this is more likely than not, the fear is that the townspeople are going to stop him. So if he goes and he does it at night and hidden, there's a good chance he's going to be able to complete his task, and he does. Now, they find out, and we're going to read this in just a second, they find out who it is, and they threaten him. So it's not that Gideon was afraid to do it in front of them. He was afraid that they were going to be able to stop him before he could finish the task. By the way, he chose those 10 men from who? Look at verse number 27 again. Then Gideon took 10 men, who? Of his servants. His father's house is the one that had the altar and the groves. Do you think these servants were worshipers of Baal and Ashtaroth as well? Probably. Probably, likely so. But Gideon evidently had the personality and the forcefulness, the influence to tell those 10 men, this is what we're going to do because God said it, and we're going to be obedient to God and not to anybody else. Verse number 28. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. So first thing in the morning, where did everybody look? They looked to their idols. And then they saw that their idols were cast down and cut down. And there was an altar of the Lord, and there was a bullock on it. And they said one to another, who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, hath done this thing. Then the men of the city, do you guys see that in verse number 30? The men of the city. Now, were the men of the city, were they the Midianites that were oppressing them? Was it the Amalekites? Is that the other group that's there? Is it the Amalekites? The Midianites? Yes, in verse number 3. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and the children of the east. Is that who's coming and oppressing or threatening Gideon? Or was it the Jews? Most of the time, where does our oppression come from? Where does our opposition come from? Does it come from within or without? Most of the time. Well, we see here that it came from within. And in my experience, and in the experience of so many other, most hindrances come from within the church than from without. No, Pastor, that's not the way we've done that in the past. Well, we've never done it that way before. I really don't like the color of the walls that you chose, that we voted on to choose. I didn't like the way that you presented that verse. I don't like that shirt that you're wearing. Most of the opposition that comes from within. And we see that here. Then the men of the city, not the Midianites, not the Amalekites, not the children of the east, said unto Joash, bring out thy son that he may die. Look at what they wanted to do. Why? Because they looked up and they saw that the altar to Baal and the groves to Ashtaroth were cast down, were utterly destroyed. Bring out thy son that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. Joash, his father, comes to his aid. He says, and Joash said unto all that stood against him, will you plead for Baal? Will you save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. So his dad is saying, what are you doing coming and crying for Baal? If Baal's a god, let him kill Gideon. Are you the one that's supposed to do it? If he's a god, let him do it. You know what the scriptures say about idols? They can't do anything. Do you guys remember the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal in 1 Kings 17? You guys remember that? All right, if not, go to 1 Kings 18. Turn with me to 1 Kings 18. And we'll pick it up in verse 25. So basically, Elijah has set forth a contest. It's going to be 400 prophets of Baal, 450 prophets to the groves, isn't it? I forget exactly now. I should have looked it up. Anyways, there's 850 against one. And Elijah says, you guys build an altar and then you sacrifice a bullock, and I'll do the same thing. I'll build the altar to God and I'll sacrifice a bullock. And the God who sends fire down from heaven, his God is God. And they accept the contest. And so we're going to pick it up in verse 25. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose you one bullock for yourselves and dress it first. You get to go first. For ye are many. And call on the name of your gods, but put no fire under. And they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them. I love this part. He eggs them on. He says, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey. Or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their manner with knives and lancets, till the blood gushed out upon them. And it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice, nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. So 850 prophets to Baal were crying, screaming, cutting themselves all day. Nothing. Psalm 115, verses 4 through 7, their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet they have, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat. What do you think God's trying to say about idols? Can idols do anything? They can do nothing. And so when Joash, Gideon's father, says, wilt thou plead for Baal? If Baal be a god, let him destroy Gideon. Let him destroy him. Let Baal speak for Baal. All right, the last verse we're going to look at tonight, verse 32, back in Judges chapter 6. Joash actually honors his son. It says, therefore on that day he, this is Joash, called him Jerubbaal. Let Baal plead against him, because he hath thrown down his altar. Jerubbaal. Some have translated that as Baal's antagonist, Baal's enemy, the defeater of Baal, the one who proclaims against Baal, the one who would stand up against Baal. There's a whole bunch of descriptions for that name. But his dad gave it to him because he destroyed Baal's altar and tore down the groves to Ashtaroth. By the way, where was all of those things? You guys remember? We read about it. It was on his dad's property. This altar, which was his dad's. And who was it that gave him that name? And who was it that defended him before the others? Probably the one who built those altars and put up those groves. The very one saw his son stand up for Jehovah God, and he said, I've seen that before. I saw that with Deborah and Barak. I've heard about that with Ehud. I've heard about that That's what that looks like. That's my son. And he gave him this name. And he said it one more time, saying, let Baal plead against him because he hath thrown down his altar. Let Baal take care of him. Because he knew that Baal could not. And so that's this section of Gideon. The next section is going to be the casting forth of the fleece and the choosing of the soldiers for this battle. And so we'll be looking at that the next time.